Hello and welcome to Heart Yoga Radio. It's New Year's Eve, and last year, actually on New Year's Day, we did a podcast looking back over 2022 and looking forward to what we think might be coming in 2021. So we thought we'd do a similar thing this year. So first of all, in our ideas about what 2021 might be like, how did we do? Did we get any predictions right?
Well, we did pretty well, really. We sort of avoided just downright predicting like old Moore of old.
It wasn't really predictions, was it? It was just thoughts about what the shape of things might be to come more, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, certain things jumped out at us. We made the point that there are lots of other events and trends that we could have lighted on, but we lighted on a few things. And so we don't exactly do the prediction thing, the old Moore's Almanac thing.
We didn't get the crystal ball out,
but
exactly.
We talk about trends, and we talked about conflicts that we thought would intensify, or struggles or antagonisms and stresses that we thought would intensify. And I think we were pretty right on a number of takes, and I thought I was going to listen to it and think, oh, bloody hell, you can speculate as much as you like, but actually it was pretty on the button. So I would recommend that you listen to it, if you've got the time and the wherewithal, and the tendency. Just go back over our stuff. Look, find January the 1st, 2021, and there it is, 40 minutes. It's very, very good, I think, actually. I was surprisingly pleased. Things we got right. Well, we said China would be moving up the agenda because at the time, you were getting hints, and it's done sort of gradually. It's allowed to intensify, and we were right about that. It's intensified the Cold War with China, the trade war with China, the general sabre rattling, and the whole palaver with China has intensified no end. As China moves forward and as America continues in decline, along with its vassal states like the UK. So we're pretty good on that. We got that right. We remarked that Trump lost, which he did in 2020. But it seemed to be planning an event on the 6th with things that he was saying.
Yeah.
And we didn't exactly say, oh, well, we're going to get a load of, people in red
horned helmets and face paint. Lots of people who just enjoyed face painting that day were going to just invade the Capitol.
This kind of fancy dress invasion of the Capitol. As Congress was ratifying the decision of the Electoral College to elect Joe Biden as the President of the United States. And of course, on the 6th, there was the famous fancy dress and homicidal, because people died in that, storming of the Capitol. And of course, that is now rolling on with trials and a lot of public debate about the significance of it, and the talk that Trump's planning some kind of repeat performance. So we were right about that. We didn't get the exact detail, but who could? We mentioned global warming, obviously, was a thing that was on the rise. We mentioned global warming, obviously, as something that was coming more and more into the public eye, and that was finally getting a bit of traction with the public. And we remark about Mark Carney, ex-governor of the Bank of England, bigging up markets as the way to address the climate change. Of course, Mark Carney, we were right that we would see more of that and hear more of that greenwashy shit. And Mark Carney offered hundreds of trillions on behalf of wealth management funds and hedge funds to the effort to save the world from climate disaster at the COP 26. So we were right that that both those personnel and that tendency would continue. Before you get carried away and think, oh, isn't that marvellous, the seriously rich are going to give their money to saving the planet, It looks great, and it was heralded thus. And but there's Noam Chomsky remarks, you should look at the small print, because they're prepared to invest, provided there's no risk. And in the small print it says, we'll invest all this money, we'll prioritise anti-climate change measures, provided we have no risk to our investors. An investment is normally a risk, it's kind of a gamble. It's an educated gamble.
Yeah, and seeing as like any investment does involve some risk, that sort of means that they wouldn't invest in any.
So they're asking the governments to sort of backstop them with potential bailouts should anything go seriously tits up on some new energy modality, you know, or some better battery technology or anything like that. So we were right about that, even right down to naming the fucking people. We talked about the build-up of alternative media both being necessary and actually happening. That the left, the broad progressive forces in society are building up their own alternative media, given that oligarchs own the old print media. And, of course, all the print media have now got super-duper million-pound websites. And we were right about that there would be a build-up of alternative media. We were right about the government pushing back on big tech regarding information and the way it deals with information. You know, FAMGA, basically, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google and Amazon, the way they deal with data, and the government would push back, signifying some kind of a split in the ruling class. There's disquiet about big tech as a rogue faction of global capital. We were right about that, which of course it is. And these are now the biggest companies in the world, you know, and I think there's a couple of $1 trillion companies amongst them. The world's first $1 trillion companies are tech companies. They're bigger than big oil, they're bigger than the military industrial, they are absolutely enormous, and they have enormous power. We were correct about that. Obviously then there would be an intensifying and colossal struggle for the internet, which we've been talking about for years. And of course we see it. It's in Congress, it's in the House of Commons, it's in governments all around the world, it's in boardrooms all around the world. Meanwhile there are geeks and programmers and developers chomping at the bit, full of ideas, all the great things they can do with this information technology. We were wrong in thinking that Brendan Smetana's enterprise might move forward a bit, because he sees that there is a struggle for the internet. That's his big thing, and that we should be looking at building our own internet with little microwave dishes and shortwave communication.
Although there are other groups which are very keen on that project that might move the idea forward, perhaps in a more organised way.
Yeah, and it does look like it, and these seem like, as far as we can see, viable projects, and we will see that, because it's an idea that's going to be too good to miss. And the old cypherpunks, of which there are still some about, we'll see the virtue of, and we'll be able to persuade other people of it. So we're kind of right about that, even though I don't write Brendan off. I think he may reappear. But that seems to have gone a bit quiet. I don't know what's going on. It might be because I'm not looking. We were right about the significance of AI, that it would continue to move forward really, really fast. And that quantum computing, which will at some point get related to AI, will move along really, really fast. Particularly China will be very busy with its AI projects and its quantum computing project, which we were right about. We were right that big oil would greenwash, which of course it did handsomely at COP26, having 500 delegates. There were more fossil fuel representatives at the COP26 than government and civil society representatives. More.
Pause for stunned silence.
You know, we were right about their general tendency to greenwash. We were right about the continued development of CBDCs, in other words, central bank digital currencies, and the opportunities that opens up for further surveillance. We were right to encourage you to watch this space regarding the United States' meanness with its own internal third world, its own poor, in the light of the pandemic, being a bit parsimonious, a bit mean in the extent to which it bailed out the average American citizen, whilst allowing its mates in the corporations to make over $1 trillion in profit out of the pandemic. And that we would see parallel moves over here, with Tory cronyism being its particular articulation, its particular dialect in this country. We were right to watch this space, because, my God, doesn't that drama continue to unfold? And so, I mean, the moral I extract from being quite pleased with what we did last year. And I didn't think I was going to be, because I'd forgotten really what I'd said, you know. The moral seems to be, don't be in a bubble, you know. You do, however painful it is, have to try and grasp the ideas, the strategies, the tactics, the people, the characters, the psychology of what is taking us down the path to fucking Armageddon. So that's my take on what we did last year. And if we can do as good a job this year, I would be very pleased.
So what are your thoughts for 2022 then? What delights do we have to look forward to in the coming year? Because I'm sure there is just so many. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've actually just taken a few notes this morning. I've been thinking about this for a few days, and I've been appraising myself of prognostications from a range of pundits. I mean, listening to the left, like Chomsky and Varoufakis and people of that persuasion, but also listen to what The Economist magazine or journal has to say on it. The Economist is a venerable economics journal, over 100 years old, I believe. Might be more than that. It's been around a hell of a long time, and it basically champions so-called free market. And I have to say that their prognostications are incredibly bland, and their analysis is depthless. It's just incredibly shallow.
There was not somebody on screen just screaming, "We're all gonna die!" Quite the opposite. Everyone stay calm.
Yeah.
Don't worry. African weaving's going to do very well this year.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of what they're about. No, I don't want to knock African fashion and African weaving and any other stuff. People want to do that. That's fine.
No, good luck to them.
The
best wishes to them. But if that's like one of their, top stories, it seems like they're missing a few things.
Yeah. So I've had a look at what other people are saying, and I've kind of looked round and I've pursued my interests, and this is what jumps out at me, and it's a little bit more than last year because I was trying to keep it like nice and neat, but last year, but this year I can't rein myself into it. So there's a number of topics. But as I say, it's what jumps out at me, and there's other things, no doubt. But the same as last year, number 1 point, China.
China.
The China virus.
Yeah.
China virus.
Biden continues with Trump's Cold War and trade war. Bad mistake. President Xi is up for re-election next year by the Communist Party. He's going to put himself forward for another term as whatever he is. I think he's the General Secretary of the Chairman of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party or something like that. Anyway, he's the top guy in China, Xi Jinping, and the party can appoint him to another term of office, which they probably will do towards the end of next year, because he's extremely capable. He might be, like most world leaders, some kind of psycho, perhaps, who knows, but he is extremely kind of capable. He's a very, very smart man, with a lot of smart people behind him. It's the way the oligarchical Chinese Communist Party works. It does have a very thorough and accurate meritocracy for getting people who can do jobs in the right place. And I'm saying all that. I don't want to talk them up, because I'm sure they fuck up lots of times. I'm sure they've got plenty of corruption and plenty of incompetence, just like everywhere else. And I'm sure they do bad things. I mean, let's just say for the record here, one of our basic premises is to expect governments to do bad things. Have a critical stance to all governments. Yeah. At the same time, realising that there are some things that we have to do collectively, and that requires us to be able to form some kind of body that will focus the collective will in a direction. Just so that you know that here at the outset. So I expect more China, Cold War, trade war, intensification, and I expect China to carry on with its project of soft power extended around the world through loans, gifts, building projects, involving countries in the Belt and Road project, or the new Silk Road, or this extension of infrastructure across the world, so that China can sell its goods, but it's doing it in a very soft power and quite an intelligent way. It's not behaving like an imperium. It doesn't have bases. I think China has one foreign base. America has 800. This is the different way they exert influence, And I expect that they will continue, and they are continuing. Whether this thing descends into a hot war or not, I kind of think I hope that there's some sense in the high places around the world. But as we know, very often there isn't. In the last century, 2 catastrophic world wars and numerous pretty catastrophic so-called minor wars, many of which were very, very intense and long-lasting. Expect more of that. And there'll be arguments around the Uyghurs and around what's happening in Hong Kong as China takes Hong Kong back into its body politic. Then, of course, there'll be all kinds of quarrels and struggles around Taiwan. I hope sense prevails and it doesn't turn into a hot war, but it could. There is massive military build-up in the South China Sea, and naval build-up, including one of Boris's, or both of Boris's aircraft carriers, which have no aeroplanes, and no British airplanes, American and French aeroplanes, no British aeroplanes. I mean, that's just such pathetic gesturing and sabre rattling at the tune of, to the taxpayer of billions and billions and billions. Ridiculous shit. It's fingers crossed on that. I don't think it will go hot, but it could, and it wouldn't surprise me either, because I think it's a close bet. It's a very, very, very dangerous situation. So we're going to keep hearing about it. It will intensify next year. I'm putting my prediction on the line that it will intensify like next year. I do view much of this sabre rattling and talk as being for domestic consumption on both sides, partly. America needs an enemy as it goes into decline, and as it drags its vassals with it, they need the same enemy. That's why there's a British aircraft carrier in the South China Sea. And, it gives Boris some bragging points, Expect more of this nonsense. And I dare say the Chinese Communist Party wants to keep its good polling in China. The Chinese Communist Party, whatever we think of it, and authoritarian it certainly is, has got like an 80 to 90% approval rating for the population. And that's not according to the Chinese government, that's according to Harvard University, who, if they had any cognitive bias, which no doubt they do, would push the other way towards China looking shit. It's Harvard University, it's the ideological pinnacle of fucking Western capitalism, I mean, meanwhile, I think China's pressing on with its yuan, its digital-backed currency, its alliances in Southeast Asia, including RCEP and ASEAN and so forth. Its deal with Iran to buy Iranian oil to the tune of, I don't know what it is, 40 billion, or is it 400 billion? A lot of money over 10 years, teaming up with Russia, forming an alternative reserve currency, probably as a central bank, a digital currency. All of this, which tends towards de-dollarisation of the global economy. This is what America's really fretting about, and it's certainly what finance is fretting about. But the dollar is still the world's reserve currency, which gives America enormous power. Everything goes through Wall Street, all transactions go through Wall Street. And they cream off every time, fees. every time they cream off. You know, somebody called it this American scam of having the world reserve currency as a currency that relies on proof of war. You know, proof of stake, proof of work, proof of trust. You know, all these various Byzantine fault tolerant proof of stake. You know, all that stuff in crypto.
Which I'm sure everyone listening to this will know exactly what you mean.
But some wag said that the dollar has got proof of war. Because if you don't behave yourself, they send in the you get a cruise missile down your chimney.
You shouldn't laugh, really, but that's such a really, really good way of describing it.
Proof of war, you know.
Very good, yeah.
And that's why they've got 800 bases, you know. So expect more and more. This is going to intensify. Because basically, the big macro pattern is America is disintegrating. It's taking Western capitalism along with it, and China is building its prosperity, including its work on general prosperity, or what they call it, common prosperity project, which they've now instituted, which is the move towards full socialism by 2050. And they're doing it in quite an intelligent way. They're going to set up a zone and try it in a zone, like they did with the experimental capitalism, which gave rise to their sort of current dynamism and eliminated quite a bit of poverty as a sort of leg up, you know. We've got to have some kind of enterprise to leg the economy up, which Deng Xiaoping saw that. And they did it, first of all, just in one area. They did it around Shanghai, a geographical area. It says, in this zone you can do this. Rest of China have to carry on being Maoist, you know. And then when it worked there, they extended it. And this is what they're going to do with the common prosperity, which will be workers' co-ops and more distribution. You know, they're now worried about the massive inequality that this quasi-capitalism that they've got has caused. So they now, if they're going to have this full socialism by 2050, they're going to have to start doing a little bit of redistribution. And so they're setting up a zone of common prosperity where they'll experiment with it in a zone. And that's now afoot. And that, if it works, that 80% rating of the Communist Party will go up to 90%, and they'll become very, very firmly ensconced, you know. Well, they are anyway. They've been there 70 years, you know, over 70 years. So expect all this to sort of pan out, you know. Now, there might be some black swan events or some unforeseen twists in that, and I expect there's enough potential there for twists and turns. Many twists and turns. I mean, it might be that somebody thought the Chinese economy could come down over this Evergrande, whatever it's called. What's it called? Over this huge real estate firm that's gone bump, and I'm not quite sure whether they got bailed out. Whether it's too big to fail by the Chinese government, you know, by the Communist Party, or whether they let it go bump. I think it actually officially went bump. You know, it officially went bankrupt.
I think so.
Yeah. And whether that would be the kind of black swan event or not, I don't know. I actually think China would survive it.
Yeah.
So expect more of that, and you know, so I've gone to I've gone into a little tiny bit of detail to try and describe the situation, so you can see what's unfolding, what different forces are operating. I mean, given that all this is happening, you've got all this sabre rattling, and why I think a lot of this is for public consumption on both sides. Even though hawks on both sides could do very well out of a hotter war or a more intense cold war, is because America still has huge investments in China. And China owns huge amounts of American debt and American government bonds, which is like debt bonds, you know, securities and so forth. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy goes on. For instance, you get Ray Dalio and Mitt Romney, who are both associated with a huge investment fund, hedge funds. I think Ray Dalio heads the world's biggest hedge fund called Bridgewater Associates. Mitt Romney, obviously, you know, a prominent American politician. Both of these guys sabre rattle against China like nobody's business. We've got to put China back in its box. The problem with China is that it exists, But they invest huge sums. Romney through his own hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, but Ray Dalio, the biggest hedge fund in the world. And you can see why China would seek some freedom from that entanglement, and which is what, Belt and Road. It's non-colonial kind of soft power. It's non-imperialist style of extending itself into the world, giving away vaccines, sending doctors, and so forth. That and of course, the de-dollarisation is why China is proceeding the way it's proceeding. It kind of has to. What would you do? I mean, one of the gripes about China, they say, well, I've got no democracy. And of course, they're saying who you can vote for. They're saying who can stand in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong's still got these residual elections. Bearing in mind, when it was a part of the British Empire, it was never properly democratic. They're pretending now that it was, but it wasn't. But China turns around and says, their diplomats turn around and say, democracy? Well, the US variant isn't very impressive. It can't even save its own people from a pandemic. They have 4 to 5% of the world's population, and whatever it is, 25% of the world's deaths. That's not a very good record for your so-called democracy. And I think fair point. And so China, watch it. It's going to be all over the place. Keep your fingers crossed it doesn't turn into something, because that is kiss your arse goodbye, basically. That is just, you think we've had some bad times, you ain't seen nothing if that kicks off. So, fingers crossed. But
just a moment to look into your crystal ball. Do you think that we could see that in 2022? Would any side really
I'm
be
sort of
stupid
about
enough?
6. I'm sick. Well, they are stupid. There's a lot of stupid people in positions of government.
Oh yes, but stupid enough.
Yeah, and we know that the world has done this before. It's thrown itself into the abyss before.
Yeah, but they haven't had weapons that we have now.
No, they haven't, but they've thrown themselves into the abyss, even having the weapons that we have now. It just kind of stayed the hand in the last analysis, but we've come very, very close in my lifetime. Mm. We were like 4 seconds to midnight in my lifetime with Cuba and so forth.
Yeah.
You must never underestimate the stupidity of the human race, unfortunately. Nor the intelligence, for that matter, though.
Yeah. Do you reckon you're about 60%
on
the side of it? Not going to happen in the next year?
It'll get nasty, messy, noisier, crazier. But the whole thing is kind of restrained by the fact that China is entangled with everybody. The whole world is entangled with China. When Russia went down, when their socialist experiment failed, it's because Russia really had been basically boycotted since the Soviet Union became a thing. And apart from its own satellite imperium of Eastern Europe, it couldn't reach out. It wasn't entangled with the rest of the world. Now the rest of the world depends on China. When you're going through your Amazon parcels, look just to see where everything's made.
Yeah.
Every damn bloody button.
Yeah. Made in China,
is made in China. And, they own most of the world's debt. They're kind of, American investors are completely up to their eyeballs in it. China's got like a free trade deal with the RCEP countries, which includes American military allies, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Come on. I mean, they've boxed really, really clever, and people are getting more and more entangled with China as they say to China, come and build us a port, like the Greeks did when they were bankrupt.
Yeah.
Build us a high-speed rail, please, which they're doing for African countries and Latin American countries. They're getting something for it, but they're just getting themselves an enormous amount of kudos, an enormous amount of trust, an enormous amount of soft power.
Just a pretty unique situation.
And those countries might turn around and say, well, can we come in on your kind of greater yuan, or whatever it is that they decides going to replace the dollar, which, America is just refusing to grow old gracefully now and just turn itself into a really, 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 really civilised, artistic, creative, scientifically excellent, integrated melting pot of a country of potentially profound magnificence, Now that it no longer has to worry about being a fucking imperium. A bit like happened to Greece, you know, when the Romans took over. The Greeks were these avuncular, kind of intellectually and artistically superior people that even the Romans admired, you know. And they could kind of bask in that for a bit. America could do that. It should grow old gracefully. But anyway, I don't expect them to. I expect this to be quite messy next year. Okay, next point. COVID.
Oh, yeah.
It will continue. I don't think it's spent yet. We expected it
Certainly the consequences are not spent yet. That's
we expected it to continue last year. But I expect improvements in treatments. Vaccines again will be revisited, and they'll get even better. They are very effective, but they'll get even better. Nevertheless, we'll see an intensification of quarrels regarding patents. That we have big pharma refusing to allow the developing world to get vaccinated. Africa gets virtually no vaccine. Latin America gets virtually no vaccine, except what the Cubans give them. Cuba, tiny country, boycotted for decades by the US, which puts its economy on a sort of pretty much on its back foot. Nevertheless, develops a vaccine and distributes it for free with no patents around the world. Cuba. America, Pfizer, no go. American politicians, no, fuck you, you got to pay. In my book, that vaccine should be... If we're going to save the world from perhaps another variant, who knows, even though it looks like Omicron might be the cock of the walk for a bit. It's a no-brainer, and they won't do it. They won't do it. And governments are backing the corporations. So, again, more of this, the grip of corporate power. But I think I'm expecting some kind of improvement. I think Omicron is looking like it might be a bit less severe, but I'm not going to jump on that yet, even though there are some papers not yet been peer-reviewed, etc., etc. And it looks like the T-cell response to other COVID variants is very, very good for not letting Omicron kill us, right? And say in the UK, 90% of people have got antibodies, either because they've been infected or vaccinated or both. Some of us have probably got very, very good antibodies and very, very good T-cell and B-cell setup. So it is going to become less serious, and there will be new antivirals and all the rest of it. More of which later. But don't expect that to go away yet. Some features of the pre-COVID world will return next year, I would say. But not all. Not all. I think people say the world will never be the same again, and that is true.
Yeah, I think so as well.
But some will. According to The Economist, even though the analysis is very slight and doesn't go beyond this point, work patterns, hybrid working over Zoom and that kind of stuff, and working from home, through the technology, is likely to persist. And I would say yes, that work patterns are changing for other reasons too. So that was my next point of interest, was work patterns into the future, into next year, based on sort of trends that we're seeing. And in the UK and the US and the developed world in general, I suppose, you see green shoots of a labour movement, and that's starting to tackle the precariat working, which basically was a really good tool in the hands of neoliberals for trashing trade unions, labour unions, as the Americans call them. We call them trade unions. And there is now a movement, a trade union movement, amongst precariat and amongst zero hours contract workers and so-called self-employed workers, which is attempting to mitigate some of the problems for workers that this style of working introduces into life, mainly like insecurity and really a condition of slavery without benefits, for workers. And we have to be very careful that the distance working, the hybrid working for bureaucrats and office workers that enables them to work from home doesn't become another cudgel to beat workers with. But nevertheless, there are green shoots of the labour movement. And there's a very important point here that the world goes down the tube unless there is international cooperation, coordination of workers' movements. Possibly with other movements, and I would say that's highly desirable with other movements, across the world, across the globe. And I think we have some initiatives that are now sort of building. Not enough, but they're building. And I would cite the increase in the number of strikes we're seeing. Particularly, in Amazon warehouses and so forth. So big tech isn't going to get a clear run now. Google have had strikes and walkouts and things. You're not going to see them escape from this now. Their workers are waking up a little bit. But also global movements like DiEM25, Yanis Varoufakis' DiEM25, which has 9 members in the Greek Parliament, and the Progressive International reaching out across the planet. And these movements are building. And I think if they can coordinate with such movements as Black Lives Matter, which was the world's biggest ever global coordinated protests or simultaneous protests, and of course the climate strikes and all the work that's being done to put the climate issue up the political agenda in the face of the miserable failure of COP26, really, to do anything but greenwash. So there is a glimpse of hope there. Obviously an immense task, an immense work, an immense project, but there is some hope there because that is happening. Hope lives here. The movement of movements needs to arise and is arising, which will globally coordinate and which will be able to hit capital where it hurts. I've put it in my notes here, hence the furore over BDS for Israel. Boycott, disinvest and sanction Israel because of its horrible, inhumane treatment of Palestinians. Right-thinking people around the world say, well, just boycott the buggers, just fucking isolate them, disinvest, just stop giving them $8 billion a year to
support their genocide project.
To support their genocide project and tool them up with state-of-the-art weapons. And the furore about that, I think, shows that the oligarchs really do not want people to get the idea that they can actually act en masse in a coordinated fashion across the globe, just the way that they do. And that this is catching on. This is where the hope is. It's not enough. It's small. It does not get into the news. Of course it doesn't. What gets into the news is a big stinking of furore about BDS for Israel. And people promoting it are told that they're anti-Semites, because of course they aren't. They may be, but they mostly are not. And I would say the intensity of that panic, again, will intensify next year again. You think 2021 was mad. 20 is going to be like fucking the cellars at Bedlam in 1841. But it's dawning on the oligarchs, that panic is because it's dawning on the oligarchs that we might just do it, and they'll throw everything at us not doing it. I mean, one of the things they'll do, and perhaps the line of least resistance for them, is to make sure we do not get the correct information. That we do not get any information. That we get distracted by misinformation. COVID is a hoax. Climate change is a hoax.
Yeah, that's how they're going to do it. They're going to feed us misinformation, and with a huge amount of emotional content that will just continue to divide the public and just send people off down wild rabbit holes of confusion and throwing all their energy in the wrong direction. Yeah, I just think that there's going to be a lot more of that, unfortunately.
That's going to get crazier.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. So that brings me on to my sixth topic neatly. Have you noticed how all this fits together? My brain was really in a get things in the right order to start with mode this morning. That's unusual for me.
That's a good mode, that one. I like that mode.
Yeah, I mean,
we should do that more often.
So, yes, information. And again, expect the struggle for the web, for the internet, to continue and intensify. Of course, it's in. Mark Zuckerberg basically lives at Congress being quizzed by AOC and such people about the nefarious goings on at his company, at Facebook. Oh, Meta. Sorry, Meta.
Yeah.
It's now called Meta. Expect more and more and more of this. There was intense struggle for the control of information. By information, I mean that flow of bits and bytes that is constantly circulating around the world between peoples, between groups, between countries, between communities. I mean any items of meaning, really. I don't necessarily mean by information that which is true. It can be false. We can have false information, true information. Information is simply the bits and the bytes, the words, the memes, the symbols that are circulating constantly. We're already seeing this in the furore over the sale of NHS data to US healthcare companies, our personal data. And I suppose Parliament in its wisdom did manage to put a little clause in there saying that we could opt out. It actually strangely didn't apply to us because our Welsh Health Service is, strange as it might seem, not privatised. Again, there were the Cambridge Analytica type scandals, which didn't really cut through to public awareness with the clarity one might have hoped and even expected, despite books being published revealing the ins and outs of what went on there. Trump was elected in 2016 by Cambridge Analytica, basically getting people to stay at home and not vote. But this approach was trumped, pardon the pun, in 2020 just by an old-fashioned ground game in Georgia, by phone banks phoning around people, getting them out to vote. And Georgia historically elects two somewhat leftish senators and black senators, and probably that was a historical precedent. Now, will it hold? Will that newfound grip of the ground game hold in the midterms, which are coming in the new year, in 22? And all the money is on the Republicans taking back both the House and the Senate, rendering Biden pretty well a lame duck, and they'll get up to all kinds of mischief and hold the world back, I would say. So, well, let's see on that one. I expect that to be, either way, quite indicative of the way things are going, the way of the game, the stage at which the game is at. One of the factors in this struggle for the internet, this struggle for the means of distributing information, is between a decentralised internet, which many programmers and visionaries imagine, versus a completely centralised internet with CBDCs at the core of that, central bank digital currencies, which will give governments and corporations probably massive opportunities for surveillance. Over and against this is Mark Zuckerberg's attempt to rebrand Facebook as Meta, and to claim and hype up the metaverse as a brand new coming thing, and the way in which we will do our hybrid work. We'll go as avatars into virtual offices and engage with ourselves in that sort of gaming, Second Life, virtual reality kind of way. Now Zuckerberg, he's talking as though this was a new thing. Second Life, which has been doing this stuff since I think 2006 or something like that. Getting on for 20 years, I think, and they've been developing constantly ever since its inception in sophistication and all the rest of it. It's not a new thing. But of course, Zuckerberg's got immense amounts of money to throw at it and to make it stick with the public, just as his kind of pretty naff Facebook notice board, bubble manufacturing piece of social media has done. So true to form, Mark Zuckerberg pinches somebody else's idea, claims that it's a brand new thing, hypes it up, and remains a centralised master of the universe. Over and against this, there's the dream of the decentralised internet. Nobody controls it, no government controls it, it's not very easy to regulate. It's not easy to turn off. Not easy to take over, not easy to use for targeting people, to manipulate their behaviour, particularly their political behaviour, particularly their voting behaviour. I mean, I don't think this receives the attention it deserves, this battle for the internet. I think it gets downplayed or emphasised in the wrong way. It's not enough is seen of the struggle of it, and too much is seen of how it can serve as some kind of villain of the piece, some kind of distraction for politicians to manipulate. I mean, the only cut through I can see here is that Zuckerberg has now become a villain. I mean, I don't think he's a good guy particularly. I don't think these tech billionaires are a force for good in the world. They are not. And none of this has helped. This Mark Zuckerberg conveniently fulfilling their own role of pantomime villain for the pantomime, which is the political life of the West. It's not helped by the fact that by the fact that the tech billionaires are just amusing themselves being shot off into space in rockets, in private rockets, and their big thing is space tourism and maybe the colonisation of Mars. Now, the space antics of Bezos, Branson and Musk are not doing the cause any favour, which we should be thankful for that, because a centralised internet controlled by half a dozen people is not going to be a force for good in the universe either. Just incidentally, Lime attempted to joke, Bezos, Branson and Musk sound like a dodgy firm of accountants, do not buy insurance from anybody called Bezos, Branson and Musk, or go to get your house conveyanced, or go and ask them to write your will or defend you in court. Bezos, Branson and Musk, solicitors to the corrupt. So more of this expected, greater intensification. No doubt many twists and turns which we cannot predict will enter the tale. Now The Economist has noticed this in its prognostications for 22, but again that they fail to analyse properly. It's just very, very, very shallow. Will this cut through to the public this year? As I say, it's just a little bit is poking out through the surface, bit like an iceberg. You've got the tip of the iceberg there and this vast continent of ice under the sea. And there is some reportage, and we can see all these lovely shots of Zuckerberg being embarrassed by AOC, and delightful they are. But that's not the whole story, And especially if you kind of dip into the tech and see what people are proposing and so forth. And the dream of the decentralised internet lives on and is very vivid in the imagination of many a geek. Yanis Varoufakis has a nice take on all of this, on the phenomenon of the tech billionaire. And he calls it techno-feudalism. He sees it as a sort of a post-capitalist stage. So we are no longer in capitalism. We are on techno-feudalism. We are all slaves to a platform. And I think he's right about that. And Amazon really sussed this out very early on by getting small traders. I don't know, say somebody who does art supplies, sells art supplies through the internet and the mail and the delivery system, or sells fishing tackle or some specialist thing, or electronic components. It was just far more convenient for these people to just sit on the Facebook platform. Facebook would charge them a little bit of rent, as it were, for the use of the platform, for the use of the infrastructure, the servers, the relays, the software that does all the shopping trolleys and all the rest of it. But of course, very quickly, Facebook was finding out what were the profitable lines of business and then starting up on its own, bankrupting its clients as it went along. They were like the perfect victims, for that kind of exploitation. And it is a feudal exploitation. And this strikes me as being a matter of class struggle. That very important thing that never gets mentioned. Class struggle is very intense in Amazon warehouses, for instance. And unions are starting to operate there, and there's an immense resistance to those workforces unionising. Whatever legislation exists, and they are very, very powerful, these companies, and they're really trying hard to face down any kind of combining by its workers or its feudal serfs. Expect this to intensify. The tech can be used differently. It could be developed in different directions. And the dream of the decentralised internet is one of those imaginings of a different use of the technology. But as it is, it's again a pretty bad situation which will intensify. The antagonisms at the core of this, the tensions and the stresses and the turbulence at the heart of this matter will intensify. Whether it'll bite through into public consciousness, again, it'll probably pop a little bit out, and I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hoping that we'll get some kind of bit more of a breakthrough. But if you've got your ear to the ground, you'll see this intensify. At the same time, the kind of oligopoly that the huge tech corporations represent does not bode well for the environment either, or for social justice either. Billionaire philanthropy notwithstanding it. Billionaire philanthropy is actually just a cover, particularly in the hands of big oil, for influencing politics and political procedures from behind the scenes through philanthropic think tanks, philanthropic institutions. Do not trust it, and expect to see more of this and hear more bullshit from billionaires about how they are trying to make the world a better place. They will try and sell it to you. This techno-feudalism will be advertised very vigorously. And so whilst we're on tech, I think I should mention AI, because last year's podcast on what we were expecting in 2021 mentioned AI quite a lot. And AI will continue to develop. There are numerous developments in AI in 2021, as we indicated in last year's version of Old Moore's Almanac. And there have been developments in AI, in drug development, in all aspects of biology, in astronomy, in medicine, in modelling climate and so forth. It's just endless uses coming along, and AI proving very useful. For instance, AI is being employed to identify drugs that might form useful treatments for COVID-19. And it's estimated that the method of surveilling various drug options is 50,000 times faster than if it were done by hand, just by the human brain. And there are too many to count AI developments. But expect this to move apace. It's not going away. And as we mentioned in the previous podcast, it could give rise to such things as autonomous weapons, some horrible surveillance. On the other hand, it could be decentralised, made available to the public at large. Communities could employ it to help them with strategies for managing their local economies and all kinds of things. It's one of these things that can go this way or that way. Which brings me to COP26 and the whole issue of sustainability. The COP26 is generally agreed by discerning commentators to be an exercise in greenwash. There were far more big oil representatives, delegates at the COP26 conference than there were governmental representatives or civil